The sun was beginning to set over the small town, casting a warm golden hue over the familiar streets. The bakery on Oak Street had been around for decades, the kind of place where the scent of fresh bread and pastries could tempt even the most disciplined person to indulge. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, the woman behind the counter, had been baking for as long as anyone could remember. Her cakes, pies, and loaves were loved by everyone, from the children who came in for a sweet treat after school to the elderly patrons who cherished her homey, comforting recipes. To them, Eleanor wasn't just a baker. She was a friend, a neighbor, a symbol of kindness in an ever-changing world. But for all the warmth she radiated, Eleanor had a secret. Her past wasn't just made up of flour and sugar. Before she settled down in this quiet town, she had seen the world. She had seen its harshest corners, experienced the chaos that only the bravest knew how to face. And through all those years, there was one person who meant the world to her, a person who had seen the same hardships and who had shared a bond of strength and resilience with her. That person was her grandson, Jacob Hayes, a Navy serviceman who had just returned home after years of deployment. As the afternoon progressed, the bakery bustled with the usual crowd. Eleanor didn't expect anything out of the ordinary. She wasn't the kind of woman who worried over much. But today would be different. A group of bikers, rough around the edges, and with eyes that gleamed with mischief, pulled up outside her bakery. Their roaring motorcycles sent a vibration through the walls, announcing their arrival long before they even stepped inside. The leader of the group, a tall, heavily tattooed man with a scar that ran across his cheek, strolled in with a cocky grin plastered on his face. Eleanor glanced up from the pastry she was preparing, a soft smile on her lips, ready to greet the new customers. She had seen people like them before, tough guys, full of bravado, but nothing to be afraid of. At least that's what she thought. They didn't seem to be interested in the pastries at first. The leader of the group walked right up to her, his tone harsh as he spoke. "We hear you've got a nice little business here, old woman," he said, his eyes scanning the bakery with a cold, calculating look. Eleanor's smile faltered for a moment, but she didn't let it show. She'd lived through enough to know how to keep her cool in situations like this. "Thank you, dear. We do our best," she said politely, wiping her hands on her apron. "We've got a deal for you," the biker continued, leaning on the counter with a menacing smile. "This place, it's nice, but it could be nicer, you know? You wouldn't want anything to happen to it, would you?" Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. Her instincts told her something was wrong, but she didn't want to panic. She had dealt with enough difficult situations in her time, but this felt different. It wasn't just about the bakery. It was something more. The biker's leader continued, "We run things around here. You pay up, we make sure nothing happens to this place of yours. You wouldn't want any accidents, would you?" Eleanor's mind raced. She knew exactly what was going on. Extortion. The bikers were trying to intimidate her into giving them money for protection. But she wasn't a woman who could be intimidated easily. She had faced much worse. Back in the days when she served as a nurse in the war, when she had to save lives amidst chaos, a few loud, threatening men didn't scare her. "Listen, dear," Eleanor said calmly, her voice steady. "I don't need your protection, and I certainly won't be paying anyone for it." The leader's eyes darkened, and the room seemed to grow colder. The bikers behind him shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension in the air. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over Eleanor. "You really want to do this the hard way, old woman?" Before she could respond, a familiar sound interrupted the moment, the roar of a motorcycle engine. The bikers froze, and Eleanor's heart swelled with a mix of relief and anticipation. The unmistakable rumble of her grandson's bike echoed. Through the street, Jacob Hayes was home. Eleanor's heart leaped in her chest. She hadn't seen Jacob in over 3 years. Not since he was deployed overseas. The last time she saw him, he had been standing on a pier, waving goodbye with that confident smile she loved so much. And now, here he was, pulling into the driveway, the very sound of his motorcycle cutting through the tension in the room like a blade. The bikers turned, their eyes widening as Jacob dismounted from his bike. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man, the kind of person who carried himself with authority and strength. His navy blue leather jacket and the American flag patch on his arm spoke volumes about where he had been and what he had endured. For a moment, there was a silence. Eleanor saw the change in the bikers' expressions. They had underestimated her. They had no idea who Jacob was. They had no idea what kind of family they were dealing with. The leader of the group straightened, his eyes narrowing. "You think you're tough, kid?" he sneered. Jacob didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked over at his grandmother, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "Hey, Grandma," he said, his voice warm and reassuring. "Is everything okay here?" Eleanor's smile was filled with pride as she looked at her grandson. "Just fine, Jacob. Nothing I can't handle." But the tension in the room was far from over. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, realizing they had crossed a line they hadn't fully understood. The leader stepped forward again, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't know who you're messing with, kid." Jacob's smile faded, and he took a step forward, the weight of his presence undeniable. "I know exactly who I'm messing with," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving the leader's. What happened next was something no one could have predicted. The standoff was far from over. The bikers were about to learn that messing with the wrong person had consequences, and Jacob Hayes, Navy veteran, was not someone to be taken lightly. But what would happen when the situation escalated further? Would the bikers back down, or was there a much darker side to their threat? The clock was ticking, and the story was just beginning. Jacob's eyes never left the leader of the bikers, his posture straight and calm, but there was something in his gaze, something that said this situation wasn't just about a bakery or a few thugs trying to push their weight around. It was personal. Eleanor could feel the shift in the air, the way the temperature seemed to drop as her grandson stood his ground. The bikers were looking at him differently now, sizing him up, and Eleanor knew it wasn't just because of the uniform. She could see it in Jacob's eyes. He wasn't just a Navy man, not anymore. He had been through things, seen the kinds of horrors and battles that would forever change a person. And now, those experiences were coming to the surface in ways she never expected. He was no longer the little boy who used to run around her kitchen, covered in flour and laughing. He was a man who had faced danger and uncertainty head-on, the kind of man who wouldn't let anyone walk all over him, no matter how many tattoos or leather jackets they wore. As the leader of the bikers took another step toward Jacob, the others behind him tensed, their hands instinctively moving toward the chains and pipes strapped to their sides. They didn't know what they were dealing with, but they could feel the weight of the situation shifting. Jacob had been trained for moments like these. His Navy training had sharpened his instincts and taught him how to stay calm under pressure. But even he knew that this moment wasn't going to end without someone walking away bruised, or worse. "What's it gonna be, kid?" the leader growled, his eyes narrowing as he sized up Jacob's military posture. "You think you can just waltz in here and threaten us? You think your little uniform gives you power? You think you're still in the Navy, huh?" Jacob didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. His voice was steady, calm, like he was speaking to a soldier, not a criminal. "I'm not threatening anyone, But I'm not leaving here without you understanding something. This bakery, this place belongs to my grandmother, and anyone who tries to take advantage of her, anyone who thinks they can push her around, they're gonna have to go through me." There was a long pause. Eleanor could feel her heartbeat in her chest, her hand gripping the edge of the counter, the weight of the situation sinking in. These bikers were dangerous. She had seen enough of the world to know that, but she also knew her grandson. She knew the man he had become, the man who had survived unthinkable battles, the man who had learned how to stand his ground no matter the odds. The leader of the bikers took a slow step back, glancing over at the other members of his group. As if silently communicating with them, Jacob noticed the flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. They hadn't expected him to be so calm, so resolute. But Jacob wasn't about to let them know just how much he had been through. He wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of seeing him rattle. "You really think you can take us on?" The leader spat, but there was no confidence in his voice now. The biker's bravado was crumbling. "We'll see," Jacob replied, his voice unwavering. Eleanor could see that Jacob wasn't just fighting for her bakery. He was fighting for something deeper. His family's legacy, his own sense of honor, the kind of values that had been instilled in him since he was a child. But there was also something else she couldn't quite put her finger on, a darkness in Jacob's eyes that she hadn't seen before, a reflection of the man who had come home from the war, the man who had survived the horrors of the battlefield, but who was still struggling to find peace in the quiet aftermath. The bikers didn't move at first, standing still as the tension built, thick and suffocating. It was clear they were calculating their next move, weighing their options. They were no longer sure they could win this standoff. Jacob wasn't just a random guy who wandered into their path. He was someone who understood conflict, someone who had seen how quickly things could escalate. And then, as if on cue, one of the bikers took a step forward, his fingers twitching, toward the large chain hanging from his belt. Jacob's eyes flicked toward him in an instant, his body already in motion. Before the biker could make his move, Jacob grabbed the first thing he could find, a large metal rolling pin from the counter, and swung it toward the biker's chest with incredible speed and precision. The impact sent the man stumbling backward, a loud crack echoing through the room. It was a brutal move, but Jacob didn't hesitate. He couldn't afford to. The remaining bikers froze, stunned by the sudden violence, their eyes widening in shock. The leader gritted his teeth, his face twisting into a snarl, as he realized they were no longer in control of the situation. This wasn't just a negotiation anymore. This was a battle. And Jacob wasn't going to back down. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of the door swinging open as another figure entered the bakery. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as the figure stepped into the doorway, silhouetted by the fading light outside. It was another biker, taller and more imposing than the others, wearing a black leather vest adorned with patches that screamed power and authority. He wasn't just some random thug. He was the one in charge of all of them. "Enough!" the new figure shouted, his voice cutting through the tension. The leader of the bikers turned toward him, his expression a mix of surprise and fear. The new biker's cold eyes locked onto Jacob's, sizing him up, weighing his worth in an instant. The room fell silent once more, the air thick with unspoken challenges. Jacob stood tall, undeterred. Eleanor could see the wheels turning in his mind. He knew exactly what was at stake. The man before him wasn't just some local troublemaker. He was part of something bigger, something dangerous. The true test was about to begin. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. The battle for her bakery had just become a war. The tension in the bakery thickened, as the man in black leather stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing on the wooden floor. Jacob's stance remained unwavering, but Eleanor could see the edge in his eyes now, a flicker of something darker, something more dangerous. This wasn't just a group of reckless bikers anymore. The man standing in front of them was a force to be reckoned with, someone who held the power to destroy everything they had worked for. The man's eyes never left Jacob. There was an eerie calm in his expression as he sized him up. "You don't know who you're dealing with, kid," he said, his voice low but full of menace. "You think you can take on me and my crew? We don't just roll through towns for fun. We own them. We run them." Eleanor could feel the heat rising in her chest. She had lived through hard times, but this was different. It wasn't just about protecting her bakery anymore. It was about standing up for the life she had built, the family she had raised. She had seen too many people back down, too many people give in to fear. But not her. Not her grandson. Jacob didn't flinch. His jaw clenched. His hands balled into fists, but he kept his voice steady. "You think this place is just some business? To take over? You think my grandmother is just a pawn in your game?" He shook his head slowly, his tone firm. "I'm not here for the fight, but I'll fight if I have to." The biker leader sneered, stepping closer, but the man in black held out a hand, stopping him. He was testing Jacob, watching how he responded, and Jacob wasn't about to give in. Eleanor's thoughts raced. She had seen enough to know that this was going to escalate in ways she couldn't predict. But then something happened, something she wasn't prepared for. The man in black smiled, a slow, almost amused expression, as if he had been waiting for Jacob to respond this way. It wasn't about the bakery. It was about respect, about proving something far bigger than a simple extortion scheme. "All right, kid," the man said, his voice suddenly shifting, a hint of admiration mixed with the threat. "You've got guts. I'll give you that." Jacob raised an eyebrow, never dropping his guard. "What does that mean?" The biker leaned in, his smile widening. "It means you've got a choice. You can leave here, walk away, and forget this ever happened. Or you can keep pushing, and I'll show you what happens when you challenge me. Either way, this ends today." Eleanor's heart skipped. She wasn't sure what to expect. Her whole life had been shaped by uncertainty, by moments that could tip one way or the other, but she could feel it now. This was the moment of truth. It wasn't just about protecting her bakery. It was about defending everything they stood for, the integrity that held their family together. And Jacob, her grandson, was the one standing at the crossroads. The room was still, the air heavy with unspoken words. Jacob's eyes never wavered from the biker leader. "I'm not backing down," he said, voice cold and resolute. "Not now, not ever." The man in black considered this for a moment, his gaze shifting over Jacob's face. He was weighing his options, clearly measuring the risk of letting this standoff continue. Finally he nodded. "You've got guts, kid. More than most of these people ever will. But this town? It's ours. And no one gets to threaten us without consequences." Jacob didn't move, but his voice was calm, almost calculating. "Maybe it's time someone else took over. Maybe it's time you realize that not everything can be bought or bullied." The words hung in the air for a long moment. Then, to Eleanor's shock, the man in black held up his hand, signaling to his crew. He stepped back, the smirk fading from his face. "All right, kid. You win this round, but don't think for a second this is over. We'll be watching." With that, the bikers turned, leaving the bakery with their tails between their legs. The engine of their motorcycles roared to life once again, but this time, the sound didn't feel threatening. It felt like the retreat of men who had underestimated their opponent. Jacob exhaled slowly, his body finally relaxing, the weight of the moment lifting. He turned to Eleanor, a small exhausted smile on his face. "You all right, Grandma?" Eleanor didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Her heart was still racing, but she was proud. Proud of the man her grandson had become. Proud that he had stood up when so many would have backed down. "I'm fine, Jacob. Thanks to you." Jacob reached over and gave her a quick hug, holding her for a moment longer than usual. The world outside was still, but the tension in the room had lifted. The storm had passed. As the door swung closed, Eleanor watched as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the bakery in the soft glow of twilight. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. The fight wasn't over, but in this moment, they had won. They had defended what mattered. Jacob stayed for a while, helping her clean up the mess left behind by the bikers, the two of them working side by side, just like they used to when he was a boy. The world outside could be cruel and unpredictable, but they had something stronger, a bond that no biker gang, no threat, could ever break. As they finished up, Jacob looked at his grandmother, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I think we've got more than just a bakery to protect, don't we?" Eleanor smiled, wiping a tear from her eye. "I think you're right, Jacob. I think we've got a whole town to protect." And for the first time in years, Eleanor realized that the battle they,